This week's show brought to you by something. I don't really think Brian likes it when I do this anyway. Welcome back to another Boxscore Geek show. I'm your host, Ray Alvarez, and I'll be talking about the Bucks. I was going to say
Nuggets. That's a great motherboard form factor, actually, Dre. Intel NUC. I don't know if you ever used that before.
It's also like a little, like a baby thing, like pacifiers and stuff. It's pronounced like, but there you go. All right, so I fell on my face there, Brian, very much like a figure skater. It wasn't years and years of practice, though, so we can move on, and the judges didn't notice. All right, so I'm your host, Ray Alvarez. You can find me on Twitter as Nerd Numbers. Produced, co-host, voice of God, man of many hats, Brian Foster. You can find on Twitter as Boxscore. Brian, you've already heard his voice, but say hey again, Brian.
Yeah, what's going on, Dre? Today is the last day before the All-Star break, so we're going to have a good old NBA All-Star game this weekend. And, of course, we had the trade deadline last week, so we've already seen a few games after all these trades have gone down. Lots of trades to talk about. Going to be a fun show.
All right, so just to break down the show table of contents, we're going to be talking about the trade deadline, as Brian mentioned, the Milwaukee Bucks and their head of analytics, the Utah winning streak, and Brian letting Dre have an excuse to bash Donovan Mitchell. You'll have to be talking about this, Brian. College hoops corruption.
Yeah.
If sorry for this, guys, we're going to be talking more about the King of Kong and the Donkey Kong world record, and then maybe I'll throw out some Sloan thoughts. All right, so I phrased this first bullet point on the trade deadline, Brian. I said Dre is immediately drawing dead after going all in. So for fans of the show that listened to last week's show, I basically came out swinging. I kept throwing, lobbing hardballs, fastballs, whatever you want to call it, just throwing as many things as I could at the Cavaliers and their ineptitude and how horrible things were going and how they weren't going to make the playoffs and how they were a poorly run team and nothing was going to save them. And the next day, they amazingly had a trade deadline set of trades that I think actually did improve them miraculously, as well as LeBron James going Super Saiyan and winning a clutch game, a needed game against the Minnesota Timberwolves. So basically, someone on Twitter, I can't remember their name off the top of my head. Maybe you can find it, Brian, but it'd take a while because it was like a week ago. But they noted that Vegas, they went from, not great at the odds, but like negative 180 to plus 110 or vice versa on the odds for the Cleveland Cavaliers to make the finals. So this was like a huge turnaround. I don't even remember all the trades. There was so much going on. Like buried in the midst of it was Dwayne Wade going back to Miami. But the key points are they acquired George Hill, Larry Nance Jr., and one other player. Who am I forgetting?
All right, we've got the trade up right now. So I'll read the entire trade off.
There were multiple, right? Because it was like multiple teams.
Yeah. And oh man, we are misclicking here. Okay, so the Cleveland Cavaliers traded Dimitrios Agravanis, Iman Shumpert, $2.1 million in cash, a 2020 second round pick to the Sacramento Kings, Jay Crowder, and Derrick Rose, and a second round pick to the Jazz. And they ended up getting in return Rodney Hood, Joe Johnson. No, Joe Johnson got released. Sorry, this is way too complicated, Dre. This is way too complicated.
So here are the key pieces. Let's break it down. They acquired. It was Jordan Clarkson I was thinking of, by the way.
Yes.
They acquired George Hill, Jordan Clarkson, Larry Nance Jr. And the key for that is they were point guardless, right? Isaiah Thomas, we had hopes he might come back healthy, but he didn't. Derrick Rose was the stupidest pickup for a backup point guard ever. So they were point guardless. That was part of the reason it was so easy, because like you mentioned that DeAndre Jordan was on the block. And allegedly one of the reasons DeAndre Jordan didn't end up on the Cavaliers was because the Clippers did not want Iman Shumpert's contract back. There was one point in NBA history.
That's a debacle for the Cavs.
Was apparently going to be traded straight up for Kenneth Faried, but also fell apart. So he's the king of trades that fall apart. But anyway, I love DeAndre Jordan. We think he's the second best player out west, right? We think it's Clint Capella, DeAndre Jordan, 1 and 2, right? So that would have been huge, kind of, except the reason I was still confident when we were talking about possible trades last week is I was like, they have so many holes on this team. So Jordan Clarkson, we don't think he's that great of a player. Although I think I'm going to try and look this up quick, just like you, Brian. He is shooting ridiculously well. I don't believe he keeps up 57% three-point shooting, but since joining Cleveland, he has played ridiculously well. But anyway, they got George Hill, Jordan Clarkson, and Larry Nance Jr. We don't think Jordan Clarkson is great, but we think he's an upgrade to players like J.R. Smith. George Hill is huge because it gets them a point guard that they woefully needed. And Larry Nance Jr. is one of just the most underrated players in the NBA. He's playing star level this season. He's played good to great the last couple of seasons and really helped out the Cavs where they needed, which is basically the Kevin Love, Tristan Thompson situation, which is Kevin Love's out injured, Tristan Thompson might be beat up, so they really needed a big. So the reason these sets of trades are so huge for the Cavaliers is they managed to upgrade three positions. And that was why I was so confident last week when I was bashing them. It's because I was basically like, it doesn't matter if they get DeAndre Jordan. It doesn't matter if they trade Tristan Thompson away, right? They're not going to be able to fix their whole team. They've got too many holes. And inexplicably, they managed to plug most of their holes and now look like a pretty strong team, especially if Kevin Love can come back healthy. Now, I'm well aware. I just want that clear. That is a big if. But it's just worth noting that in both the East and the West, there is a very real wild card dark horse factor in the playoffs with an MVP caliber player coming back healthy into the playoffs. So if Kawhi Leonard or Kevin Love comes back healthy in the playoffs, there could be a huge shakeup. So amazing set of trade by the Cavaliers. And then, admittedly, they also, getting rid of like Derrick Rose and Iman Shumpert. It's the don't play bad players point we always bring up. Just getting rid of players on your team that aren't helping is huge. So this trade across the board, across the board are huge. As you noted, that Utah trade, so much stuff going on there. But clearly I was wrong. And let's see. The Cleveland Cavaliers, since that trade, as mentioned, they won a clutch game over Minnesota. As I noted, that was before anybody joined the team. And they've gone 4-0 since making that trade. Now, admittedly, one of those wins, I might throw this back to the Bucks in a second. One of those wins was against the Hawks. That doesn't mean anything. But back-to-back wins against the Boston Celtics and the Oklahoma City Thunder, that is huge. That is huge. I haven't analyzed the strength of schedule for the rest of the season, but they're looking in good shape. That was. I was thinking there was a very real chance Lou was going to get fired by the trade deadline or not trade All-Star break, and now they're one of the hottest teams in the NBA. So I don't have much more to say other than I was clearly wrong. To your point, what you were saying, like a lot can change. I agree. Like Arturo on Twitter, American Numbers, if you don't follow him, was making fun of some pundits that were like, all you people that were bashing Cleveland, no faith in LeBron. Now look at you. And it's like, no, flip 60% of your starting roster. That's a different team. And that's fair to change your mind.
You have a hypothesis. If you see new evidence, you change your hypothesis, right?
So to give some update too, my goal was Monday through Thursday. I'm going to easily rip that up, but I'm still going to be trying to do daily blogging at nerdnumbers.com. Not necessarily daily, but just more regularly blogging. So I'm happy that we're going to have 3 articles up there this week. But one idea that was floating around my head is just if you do preseason predictions and preseason projections of team wins, and that was the first project the Boxscore Geeks had when we started. There are so many teams at this point you just have to rip up, right? The Cavaliers, I don't give a damn what you said at the start of the season. You have to accept now you had no idea it was going to be anywhere close to this, right? You did not know that Kevin Love was going to get injured midway through the season. You did not know that how Isaiah Thomas or Derrick Rose were going to play. You did not know they were going to make this trade. You did not know that LeBron James, as the highest mileage player in the NBA at his age, was going to play Super Saiyan to start the season. You didn't know. Bullshit. Rip it up. Same is true with the Pelicans, right? You didn't know that DeMarcus Cousins was going to go out injured before the All-Star break. You didn't know they were going to pick up Mirotic. There is nothing you can say. There is nothing about your preseason projections that you can say unless you included it. And to throw back to what I said, this is how the box story started. The thing we did that I loved, all the props in the world to Arturo and I did this, is, we showed our performance projection for players and our player minutes projection. And that's the right way to do it because you can go back and fact check yourself. But it became very apparent to me very quickly just how quickly this goes wrong, right? You think this guy's going to get major minutes. He gets injured, like John Wall, Satoransky situation, right? Suddenly the backup's getting more minutes and everything you thought was off. So many teams at this point in the NBA, and this was like an article I didn't get written, but was like, if you made preseason projections at this point, there are 5 to 10 teams that you just have to rip it up, right? John Wall is out injured for an elongated period of time. I'm trying to get the Bulls, who freaking know, the Bobby Portis, Nikola Mirotic fight in addition to the Mirotic trade. At this point in the season, nothing you said preseason really should hold up, and I noticed, I love what you did there, Brian, which is, Patrick did a check-in on the Boxscore Geeks portfolio. I'm going to admit, I haven't checked it. How's he doing?
I've read through it, but I haven't quite figured out what it means for his portfolio overall. But it's like you expect, some are going well, some are not. So just like you said.
Yeah, we were talking some data and data, like how to portray data pre-show, and we might bring that up with points per game when we talk Donovan Mitchell. I for the most part like this chart, but the one thing it's missing is just here's the current state it looks like it's in. But yeah, like going over, like the Knicks, who freaking knew, because right, Porzingis is out for the season. Utah, you can maybe do it. Oklahoma City. Okay, so watch this, Brian. Sorry, that was very disjointed. I'm just going to run down it carefully. I'm going to go through Patrick's projections and just note some things.
This is an article up on boxscoregeeks.com right now.
So the New York Knicks, Kristaps Porzingis is out for the season. Tear it up. Oklahoma City, Andre Roberson is out for the season. Tear it up. New Orleans, as I mentioned, DeMarcus Cousins out for the season. Tear it up. Los Angeles Clippers, surprisingly, Los Angeles Clippers traded Blake Griffin out for the season. Tear it up. Denver Nuggets, I get to leave them alone, right? I get to leave Denver alone. Jokic, by the way, is the recording of this. Fastest triple-double in NBA history. Oh, my God, I love Jokic so freaking much. Patrick's over on 45.5 might still happen. Who knows? Cleveland Cavaliers, as we just spent the first segment of the show talking, revamped half of their roster. Tear it up. Boston, now, admittedly, that one's fun. They always screw us, Brian, don't they?
Now, to be fair, you're saying tear it up based on just huge changes to the team, not if Patrick's going to get to his bed or not, right?
So that's what I'm saying is whatever you said preseason. This is the point. Sorry.
Right, okay.
Whatever you said preseason, I don't give a damn about. I don't give a damn if it's right or wrong. You have to accept that you did not know what is currently happening would happen, which means, it's like I think I brought this point up to you before. There's a famous dialogue back and forth back when computers were first being invented as a concept. One of the biggest names is Charles Babbage. This is one of the coolest things. I don't know how close you live to it. Jeremy Britton took me to this museum once in Mountain View, California, like the Computer History Museum. And so Charles Babbage came up with an idea for a computer, like wrote the blueprint, didn't make the computer, and then years and years later, people built the actual computer, and they were called like computing devices or whatever back in the day. So he was giving a lecture on the modern day computer, and the idea was a lot more simple than what we have now. It was, you have this machine, you give it inputs, does a bunch of calculations mechanically, right? Crazy back in the day, and it gives you an output. And so he was talking about, how this could speed things up, right? Faster than Abacus is, faster than doing things in your head. And someone asked him, I believe, if you gave the wrong inputs to your machine, could you get the right output? And that's nonsense, right? That doesn't mean anything. And he was dumbfounded by the question. But the point being, when I'm talking about predicting the NBA season, I can give bullshit reasons, right? I could say to you, the true fact about the Boston Celtics is Gordon Hayward is going to be MVP. Gordon Hayward is going to be worth 20 wins this season. They're easily going to take the over. They might finish this season at the over. They're looking like it. And that's why I just said out loud to myself, man, they always screw us. Patrick bet the under 54.5 wins on Boston. On paper, such a good damn move. And when Gordon Hayward went down in the first game of the season, oh my goodness, that had to have looked like minted money. That had to have looked like Bitcoin 2 months ago. And then, of course, Jason Tatum is close to the Rookie of the Year, if not the Rookie of the Year. Brad Stevens is a coach. Kyrie Irving has completely come back. Al Horford's drunk from the fountain of youth. So whatever. So the point being, you could put the wrong input into your projection, Boston over 54.5 wins, and get the right out and get the quote unquote right output. because it's not the same as like a mathematical calculation. So that's why I'm saying when I'm saying tear it up, you're right. I'm not saying tear up the bet, you're wrong. I'm saying tear up whatever you told me because you were off of a different set of assumptions. Boston, as mentioned, tear it up, right? Gordon Hayward went down injured first day. Toronto Raptors, I don't think there's been anything major unless I'm crazy, right?
No, I don't think so. They've just been really good and solid.
Okay.
They have not had injuries like they usually do, so that might have been part of it.
Memphis Grizzlies, like everything's gone to heck there too. So, tear that up.
So I want to point out that bet, Dre, because Patrick has been betting the under on Memphis for several years in a row now, just based on them being really old. And they just keep winning despite that. But it looks like this is maybe the year Father Time has finally caught up with Memphis.
Yeah. And so I'll also be clear, too, because a lot of the studies, like a guy we liked, his username was Wilku. One of my favorite basketball writers ever, said he doesn't write anymore. Like I said, my secret hope is that he was hired by a team who ignores his good advice. But he would compile these lists of preseason projections, right, and say, you predicted they'd win 36 wins. They won 39 wins, so you were this close. And at the end of the season, here's who was the most right. And I'm saying, after years and years of doing that, I'm just concluding how BS that is. And I'm pointing that out too, right? Memphis, the under, that's usually easy, right? Because typically if there are injuries and unexpected things that happen, they don't make you a better team usually. But I would still say whatever win-loss projection you had for Memphis at the start of the season is not the same as it is now. Portland, I think, has been pretty stable. Washington, obviously, John Wall is out. Milwaukee Bucks, they're okay. Philadelphia is an interesting one, right? With Fultz, Markelle Fultz is out for the whole season. Joel Embiid, I'll give you them though, right? I'll give you Philly. Not you could have probably have guessed Embiid based on last year and all that. So the Detroit Pistons, they traded for Blake Griffin, so toss that out. Indiana Pacers, you can give whatever. Oh, Patrick's already won it. Really? The over under on Philly or on Indiana was 31.5. Man,
yep.
People over Paul George.
If I remember, Patrick loved that bet when he made it. So there you go.
Yeah. I will say, like, Victor Oladipo did massively outperform. I mean, I would have expected regression to the mean. He had a pretty bad season last season. I would have expected maybe a little improvement based on the age curve, but he played remarkable to start the season to help do that. The Utah Jazz, Rudy Gobert missed lots of time. So, you could probably tear that one up too. No idea on Brooklyn. Chicago traded away Mirotic. The Houston Rockets, wow. I mean, it would have been remarkable if Patrick won that now, but they do have the best record going into the All-Star break, so that one looks pretty safe.
Yep.
Really, Patrick, I'm going to give Patrick, I'm going to, give a clap of my hands to an under 25.5. Usually those kind of bets scare me. So there you go. I mean, basically going over all of Patrick's portfolio, regardless of how Patrick does, I'm just saying, and this has been my entire point about projections for years now, after doing it for a few years. The basketball season is so complex that and basketball is, we already know this, right? The top 10 players tend to dictate finals. If at the start of the season there was a cool running situation and Steph Curry fell over and broke Kevin Durant's leg and Steph Curry himself was injured for a few months, we would fully expect the season to be vastly different than it is now. And, some of the time, I mean, that was one bit of credit we actually gave Doc Rivers back in the day, where he was talking about Golden State winning a title and just saying you have to be really lucky to win a title, meaning you have to, and I think he elaborated and said, you have to stay healthy, right? That we've seen some good teams that, as an example, one of my favorite in NBA history, the Phoenix Suns lost to the Chicago Bulls in the NBA Finals. A fun stat on that, they actually outscored the Chicago Bulls. They won the popular vote but lost the Electoral College.
Too soon.
Never too soon. I'm going to be bitter forever, Brian.
Yeah, me
but
too.
But what I was going to say is right before that series started, he was a role player, right? Not a player most people would give credit for. And, only played like 20 minutes a game, but was a huge player. He's a Boxscore Geeks player we liked. I'll probably mess it up. It was either Celebos or Sayabos. I don't know.
Cedric Sabalos.
It's Sabalos?
Yeah.
It's not.
We used to call him Cedric Onions for Cebollos, but it was actually Sabalos.
So it is the two, like Arturo. He does the two L's just to muck you up.
Oh,
Okay.
that's a good point.
Okay, so I'll just say Cedric for the rest to not muck it up. Cedric got injured and didn't play the finals at all. And in a series, a 6-game series where they actually outscored and lost some very close games, losing a role player like that is actually huge. You know, that's one place we always come from, right? These productive players that do the things that are needed to win are vastly underrated in the annals of NBA history, right? Even the Bulls with Michael Jordan, a reason they were so great, both of those series, is they had some really great players outside of Michael Jordan, even outside of, Steve Kerr was a role player on that second three-peat. Now, we admit fully he was not a Hall of Fame player. I'll give him Hall of Fame with coaching, easily. If you do the Voltron trick or something, you put together his player career and his coaching career, easily gets to the Hall of Fame. I would argue if you're going to put coaches in the Hall of Fame and as so much credit as you can give to a coach, if you have the all-time winningest record over 4 NBA seasons and come away with 3 titles, we'll see, right? We'll see what happens. Fingers crossed on this season.
He did make the Final Four in college as a player.
Oh, wow. There you go.
I don't know how much you count that. I don't know if he ever played internationally as a player, though.
We've kind of pointed this out before Hall of Fame. Most players that make the NBA had to be super impressive to get to the NBA. So it's hard that any player in the Naismith basketball, that's the key word, Hall of Fame, doesn't belong there, right? Because the players that make the NBA, this is Dave Barry's research, made the NBA because they made it to Final Fours, which means they won tons of college games and did really well in college. And we've argued forever, and it's been true in the past and getting more and more true as billions of dollars from ESPN pour in. NCAA is a professional league. It is arguably the second strongest professional basketball league out there, or AAA or whatever, right? So it's hard to argue with anybody getting into the Hall of Fame, including college credit. The same thing. I don't think Ralph Sampson. Shout out to Chris Ye. I actually never said this on air. He corrected me because I was talking about Ralph Sampson being in the NBA Hall of Fame. No, it is the Naismith Hall of Fame. And I was bashing Ralph Sampson, saying he never amounted to a great NBA player, which is true. His college career has to have merited Hall of Fame career, right? He was an amazing college player. Chris Webber, if he had done nothing in the NBA, would probably belong in the Naismith Hall of Fame for the Fab Five. So thanks for the tangent there.
Chris Webber's had a pretty long broadcasting career already, too. So he'll have, by the time he gets older, he'll have had a long life in basketball.
I'm going to try and think. Let's see. Any other? Let's mention the trade deadlines. Elfrid Payton for a second-round pick.
That was a steal. I like that one.
Nice pick for the Suns. This is remarkable to just show. Elfrid Payton, what was he drafted back in the day? Do you have that offhand?
No, but I would guess he was in the teens of the first round, or maybe 10th, something like that. Maybe later, right? Maybe late first round, but he was a first rounder.
He was 10th by can you guess who?
I thought it was the Magic, but I guess not. I guess it was someone else.
It was the Philadelphia 76ers. I assume
okay.
He's played his entire career. So
he was 10th. Wow, that was a lucky guess by me. Very lucky.
Probably one of them famous. Oh, yeah, here's what happened. This was we loved this at the time. This was great. The 76ers drafted drafted him and then traded him with Drew Holiday for Nerlens Noel.
That's right. That trade.
That was a great trade. But just to that point, right, you have a top 10 draft pick that years later turns into a second round pick. And so to all of these people that are hoping their team is going to tank, to the Knicks, as you noted, because they're like, man, we're tanking now. In a couple of years, the player is probably just going to get traded away. And in Elfrid Payton's case, it's almost baffling because we don't think he's a great player. He needs to cut his damn hair. I feel
I don't mind it.
I feel like an old man. No, if you watch, there have been a couple plays where it literally gets in his face.
Oh, interesting. You think it hurts his vision?
I think it does hurt his vision. So it feels funny to sound old manish like that, to sound get off my lawnish. Oh, let's see. Other trades that happened. The Denver Nuggets traded. Finally, they got rid of Emmanuel Mudiay. It's amazing that Devin Harris, who we think is a below average player, I think is an upgrade. Got rid of Emmanuel Mudiay. I'm so happy. I don't want to do this to myself, Brian, but I am feeling cautiously optimistic about the Nuggets. Jamal Murray is overperforming what I would have thought this season. Young players can do that. I've been like, we need a guard, we need a guard, we need a guard. And here's an interesting point I don't know if we'll have time to talk much about this. Just as an FYI, we need to make some fixes to the positional adjustment. This happens like once a year. I haven't really been on the development side of the Boxscore Geeks this year. We need to fix it. We will expect next week to just see an update about the positional adjustment on the site. Just because, classical data is easy, but when we're trying to do a live feed every day, we use Yahoo Sports, as I mentioned. If one of us isn't keeping our eye on it, if things get weird, it can get weird, and that's happened this year. So apologies for that. But I thought the Nuggets needed a point guard, and the reality is, if you look at this gets weird. I've always hated the small ball notion, this notion that you can take big players and space the floor. But something that does seem to be happening, and the Houston Rockets might be leading the forefront of this now, is the traditional basketball model, and the thing we actually use in the Boxscore Geeks algorithm for wins produced, is a point guard, because we consider the player that holds the ball to be the point guard, and we grade them harsher because we expect point guards to get more assists.
They have more opportunities, right, because they hold the ball.
So you're at stats.nba.com. You can actually go to touches per game, and if you go to the Denver Nuggets, what you will notice is Jamal Murray, Gary Harris, and Will Barton. Will Barton gets a fair amount of touches. And so what the Denver Nuggets is, it's not like the triangle, but the Denver Nuggets backcourt of Jamal Murray, Gary Harris, and Will Barton, I'll actually give some credit where I'll say we grade. I hate being that guy because this is such a common argument that comes up. Like, we're like, Jamal Murray's not that great. I was looking into it, and he's a really good shooter. And I was like, why are we grading him? I was like, his assists aren't high, but then I looked into it, and Will Barton gets more assists and gets more touches. So really, the Denver Nuggets backcourt of Jamal Murray, Gary Harris, and Will Barton is freaking strong. It looks great. They've always been a glut at the front court. This year is no different, right? They have Mason Plumlee, Nikola Jokic, who, as mentioned, just got the fastest triple-double in NBA history. Trey Lyles, who, has turned – Trey Lyles is a better player than Donovan Mitchell, who will be our next subject. If they ever want to play him again, Kenneth Faried. They probably have some draft pick for a big that's going to be amazing. The Denver Nuggets tentatively look great. Their playoff rotation, that's their top 6 players, look fantastic. I think they need to move on from Wilson Chandler as well. He's just been beat up and injured, never that great. But for the first time in years, I'm feeling tentatively good about the Nuggets and think their playoff shot's pretty good.
So what's going on with Faried? He was back in the rotation for a while. Is he hurt again? Or
I don't like him, and I don't know why. And I mean,
if he was playing instead of Chandler, they'd be in such good position right now.
Well, maybe, I mean, I can. This is a very real thing, and I'm okay with. It's possible there's not a position for Faried, and we were talking preseason where like the writing was on the wall. When they signed Plumlee, Faried could have very obviously gone, wait a minute, I'm getting $16 million a year here. I'm pointing to my hand on the live show. Pointed his hand again. I'm getting $16 million a year. I know Jokic is the star. You'd be a freaking fool not to have Jokic to be the starter. You've got Plumlee, you got Lyles. There's an odd man out, and it's me now. And it's possible that it's led to strife in the backcourt, not the backcourt, behind the scenes. And it's hard to know. And the annoying part, we've talked a lot about the weird paternalistic nature of sports, where you have to reprimand players. It's funny. My wife is a teacher, and I've talked to her before about young kids. And one thing she hates is this. A lot of old school teachers have this attitude of, if this young kid, if this not infant, but like toddler or older, right, young, kindergarten age or whatever, doesn't listen to me immediately, I have to be like, boy, you're out of line. Felt weird saying that. Intentionally racist, but that is a weird thing to say. But
the George Lakoff strict parenting model, right? Strict father.
Exactly. Don't talk back. Don't sass me. Listen. Get in line. And my wife's always been like, that's kind of weird. And then you notice like that kind of situation can escalate, right? The kid doesn't do something you ask, you yell at them, they yell back, the kid runs away, and and people are like, kids these days with manners. And my wife is very much the more flies with honey than vinegar, even though I don't think that's true.
You catch more flies with honey.
Yeah, which odd choice, but the point being, she said, there are a lot of times if you just try and communicate with them as if they are human, like they scream and you're like, hey, clearly something's the matter. It's possible you are young and haven't fully formed everything in your brain. Maybe I should discuss with you as to why. That can work better. And the same can be true with athletes. Like, these people are adults at a job, and they're basically expected to have someone who yells at them regularly, right? That is kind of weird. Most other careers, we don't accept that. there are lots of businesses and industries where we're starting, here's hoping in 20 years that the idea of the like asshole director in Hollywood is gone. But, in sports, it's still very much expected that a coach is supposed to yell at you if you don't listen. So who knows what's happening with Fareed? Who knows whose fault it is? But he is obviously on the blacklist. He's not getting played. But the Nuggets tentatively look good, and I'm excited about them for that.
I'm still skeptical about Chandler as a power forward. I mean,
he
doesn't even rebound. Like, they could put Trey Lyles or someone else if they can't play Fareed.
With the pieces, it's like a Lego set. They have the pieces, excluding Fareed, which breaks my heart, but fine. Excluding Fareed, the Nuggets have all of the pieces to be a strong team in the playoffs, which is the first. Because I mean, that with like when it was Emmanuel Mudiay, like it's the same situation we went to talk to the Rockets, where I was like, they're just never going to go anywhere. They don't have a point guard. They finally, their backcourt. I'll say their backcourt, right? So it may not be point guard, but their backcourt's finally figured out. I'm very excited about the Nuggets. Let's see. What did Dallas do? Dallas did something that was okay. Oh yeah, they were part of that trade, but didn't really do anything. Like, I think they got Devin Harris for like a pick. So like New York is just stupid. I don't know why New York picked up Mudiay is beyond me.
We criticized them trading away the other Hernan Gomez last week, who's a 23-year-old good young player. So yeah, it's really confusing to me. So one interesting thing.
Admittedly, we're trying to tank. If New York's goal was to tank, picking up Mudiay is it's going to help that along.
That's a really good point. And all I was going to say is Porzingis getting hurt may not help their tanking. The big men that are behind him are a lot better than him. So
that's interesting. So who's been taking his minutes? I mean,
I'm not sure, but we can look at their roster. Like all those big men, O'Quinn.
O'Quinn is great. We love O'Quinn.
Let's see. There's one other. So they still have Noah, who's been okay per minute this year, but apparently he's just not going to get minutes. So he's probably too old to be a factor anyway, even if he ever did get minutes. But yeah, okay. Let's see. Let's bring up the Knicks roster here. I'm curious. Who is this other big man that I like on the Knicks? Oh, Enes Kanter, of course. He's been their best player. He's having a great year. One of the best rebounders and high-efficient scoring big men in the league.
Use this to jump into our next. I mean, they're doing a good job tanking, but they've played the Boston Celtics, the Milwaukee Bucks. I want to look at that Atlanta. If you have time, Brian, get the Atlanta Hawks. It was on February 4th. I'd be curious the popcorn machine model because the Hawks are really bad. I'd be curious if Hornacek bench somebody. They've lost to a lot of really good teams. They've played a string of playoff teams in their last 8 and lost all of them. So there you go. I'm going to use that as an excuse. One of the teams that's been beating up on the New York Knicks is the Milwaukee Bucks. Now, it looks like things have turned around since the firing of Jason Kidd, and we were talking this a little last week, and I'm just going to verify. Please, Nuggets, don't have blown this. So the Nuggets were up like 13 points. Oh yeah, it's over. It's over. I'm okay calling it. The Nuggets are up 16 points with 2 minutes and 44 seconds to go. I apologize. I'm going to risk an autoplay ad. So if you start hearing something on a GM truck or whatever, or some guy
like a rock,
I don't know what you call this. So there's a triple double, of course, right? But he got so let's see. If you factor in free throws, I would call it a 15 by 3, meaning he got 30 points, right, which would be 15 made field goal attempts if we're talking 2, 15 rebounds, 17 assists, a steal, 2 blocks. That Jokic, I haven't had time for it this year, and if I was doing it, box scores of the week. I'm just gonna can I do this, Brian? I'm gonna do it right here. I'm doing it live. Stick my foot in my mouth. Wait till LeBron James gets a quadruple double this week to show me up.
The box score of the year.
Box score of the year.
There we go.
I'm calling it now. Calling it early. It's over.
So off the top of my head, Dre, the only contender is that crazy James Harden game from about a month ago. So I'd like to see those two head to head. A
60-point triple double, right? First in NBA history.
Yeah.
Okay, so these are actually. I'm going to look into these. That's you might have made a very interesting, easy article for a day or two from now, Brian.
I've got a couple articles too. I need to talk to you about, Dre. There's a lot going on right now.
Yeah, tons. But what I was going to say is, that's so. James Harden had the first, I believe, 60-point. I think I'm getting that right. It's either 50 or 60. It's the first X-point triple-double in NBA history. Nikola Jokic has the fastest triple-double in NBA history to go with a 15 by 3 is what I'm going to be calling it. Those are both prime contenders. I'm going to have to decide which is box score of the year. And then what I'm going to say, here's how I'm going to shut it off. I'm leaving out. The only thing I'm letting past these is a quadruple double. You're on notice. NBA teams, I'll say I'm wrong. There is not a box. I don't care. I'll give 2 actually, Brian. I'll give 2. So I'm already I'm already. This is like why I don't do projections, because I'm already giving like tons of outs. If you beat 81 points in an NBA game or a quadruple double, either of those, I'll consider looking at it. Beyond that,
well, that's okay. They're at the All-Star break, so this article could be the midway box score of the year, the first half box score of the year, even though it's mathematically more than half. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's fair. Okay, but anyway, so my point to that, though, so I just looked up to verify the Bucks. The Bucks, the only playoff team the Bucks have beaten since they got rid of Jason Kidd was the Philadelphia 76ers. All of the other teams they've beaten up on are the Knicks, who are tanking now, admittedly tanking, right? They're trading away their veterans. As you noted, Hernan Gomez is 23. The Knicks, the Suns, these bad teams, they have lost every good team. The only 2 playoff teams they've beaten, the 76ers and the Washington Wizards this series. So the Milwaukee Bucks, it's easy to get optimistic and say they look in good shape. And I pointed out the elephant in the room before. I've always just had a chip on my shoulder about a combination of the APBR, ABPR. I always get the acronym confused in my head. But basically, there have been multiple groups of advanced stats communities throughout the course of NBA history. And I was late to the party, right? I joined Wages of Wins 2009, 2010, somewhere in there. So there had already been years and years and years of stuff going on before then that I wasn't privy to. And then since then, like the same groups, a lot of those people that are from the APBR early days have gone on to work for NBA teams. A lot of them write for a place called Nylon Calculus now. So there have been like weird battle lines drawn, and I might make this comparison when we talk King of Kong at the end, where there are these like weird niche nerd groups that it's just always fascinating to come. So I've always had a little chip on my shoulder about that. In particular, like the amount of flack the wins produced statistic has gotten and how so many people write it off. And then the same people. So I don't remember his last name. I'll call him out. It's pseudo subtweet, right? Or like not officially calling him out. A guy named Justin, I think it's Across the Court or something is his Twitter handle. Like he's bashed the wins produced thing, and he made a horrible metric called Dre or Dredge using bad regression analysis.
That stat is from Nylon Calculus last year, right?
Yeah. So the chip on my shoulder is very much going, if you are going to come up, if you want to make the argument that regression analysis using box score statistics is bad and that we need to analyze basketball in other ways, I don't agree with that assessment, but I am fine with that argument. But when the same people say the wins produced statistic is bad and then basically ignore the exact same, not even the same flaws. So if this makes any sense, the criticisms they have given to the wins produced statistic are ones that they have not only blindly ignored in other stats like BPM, like Dre, like Dredge, they're ones that they have ignored in a sense that the wins produced statistic will pass muster in a college level regression course. Dave Barry does teach college level regression and econometrics. He is published in it. The wins produced statistic was first published in some college papers and was published by Stanford Press in the book The Wages of Wins. A lot of these other stats, I put us in the same me, myself, and you, Brian, right? We're bloggers, right? Like I post a lot. That's not the same as peer review. I'm not saying peer review is perfect, but I'm just saying you always have to be careful when you say, I found this blog on the internet that says something I agree with. That's fine, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's held up to the most scrutiny. So I'm saying I'm irked at a lot of stuff regarding like the ABPR community and Nylon Calculus, because not only are these people that have criticized us in the past, they're people that have basically given a pass to their friends for the same criticisms in a way that not only are they giving them a pass on the same criticisms, those criticisms wouldn't actually hold up to peer-reviewed rigor from someone who knows what they're talking about. So I'm not saying that like some of the arguments you could give to the wins produced statistic, Dave Barry has countered, or are ones that I'll even hold up my hand. Like the position adjustment is always ones where I'm like, you know what? There are snowflakes like Giannis, or unicorns, a better term. There are unicorns like Giannis and Dirk where I just go, a model is limited. Any model out there is limited. And there are players where as soon as you hit them with your model, instead of trying to fix the model to make that player work, you say, this player is a corner case, an edge case, any tester would know that. I'm going to have to handle it differently. So what I'm saying is the wins produced statistic basically stood up to a lot of scrutiny that's been ignored. Other stats get through. One of the people I'm going to be talking about is Seth Partnow. So I've mentioned him a few times before. I have a chip on my shoulder about him, and he now works with the analytics department for the Bucks. He's worked for them since 2016, and there was recently an article in the Journey Sentinel about him that, is basically, let's just be candid, it's just very much the classic fluff piece. Hey, the Bucks have an analytics guy. Analytics are cool. Analytics. I mean, I've gotten. Let's see. I made a comparison at one point on Twitter that I really, really liked, and I'm dropping it in my head, where it's just like oh yeah, here was the comparison I made. I really like this, Brian. I compared analytics departments and NBA teams a lot to New Year's exercise equipment, right? Every New Year's, a bunch of people, they make New Year's resolutions. I'm going to get in shape. I'm going to run 10 miles a week on the treadmill. I'm going to, get a rowing machine and get my arms buff. And they buy this exercise equipment, and it sits in the basement for 2 years before they put it out for free on Craigslist, a thing I've mentioned I hate. So a lot of teams have analytics departments. Doesn't mean a damn thing, right? It doesn't mean you listen to the analytics department. And so there's this article about Seth Partnow about the Bucks, and I actually did read through it. I followed my own rule. There have been a lot of times where I've been the old get off my lawn guy, and I'm like, that's stupid. And then basically I go, well, if I'm going to criticize it, I should at least read it all the way through. The interesting thing about Seth Partnow and the Milwaukee Bucks is a lot of what is said in this article doesn't line up. So, for instance, they talk about defense and offense. And at one point he says, even during our losing stretch, we had an offensive rating in the top 10s. The Bucks currently have a top 12 offensive rating in NBA. And even then, that's an interesting metric because there are 30 teams in the NBA. The top half make it to the playoffs, right? If you are a top 10 team, that means you are in the bottom third.
Also, let's also say that if he's using top 10 offensive team, that means he's conceding he's a worse defensive team than offense. So he's saying that this is what we should hang our hat on, being top 10 in offense.
Yeah, and so what I'm saying is, one thing you've always been good at, and Dave Barry's always good at, is I always call it the Brian magnitude test. And actually, what I'll call it is like...
Don't compare me to Dave Barry, but thank you. I appreciate it.
You both have B as one of your...
There you go. One of us has been published numerous times. The other has an undergraduate degree, but go ahead.
It says a lot to me, by the way, while I'm talking about the chip on my shoulder about the basketball stats community. By the way, I'm going to Sloan, so this is funny. Why don't I throw a bunch of balls at that community before go hanging out with them? But it says a lot that, a tenured professor of economics that teaches the subject that a lot of these metrics are built on, namely regression analysis, that is BPM, that is Dre, that is Dredge, that is wins produced. That a person that is a tenured professor, multi-published, has work published, academic work published on this, that is regularly called on by like Huffington Post, Forbes, New York Times back in the day to write about this, that person is considered outspoken. Whereas I've told this to Dave Barry's face, I consider him very vanilla in the land of sports economists. Outside of the advanced basketball stats community, Dave Barry is a vanilla economist that you just call as a talking head to say something very standard and boring. Inside of the basketball community, it's outspoken to be like, you know what, missed shots might be bad in basketball. So anyway, but he's talking in this article, Seth Partnow just sets a few talking points. And like the main one, he says like talking about offense versus defense. And just we kind of noted that the Bucks didn't have a good defense. It's possible Jason Kidd was a good coach, but then that makes it more fascinating because if the Bucks are running a bad defensive scheme and they're claiming they have an analytics department analyzing the defense, what the hell was going on there? Jason Kidd also starts talking about the value of three-point shooting, which I thought was fascinating because the Bucks don't shoot threes that well. Now, to be fair, that is one thing I've argued. The key about success in the NBA always it's just about outscoring your opponent. There's no the one thing I'm really excited about esports, and we might talk that a little bit at the end of the show, Brian. But esports, what's fascinating is it comes around the right way, right? The people that become really good at esports very quickly learn these are the things I need to maximize to win, right? What better than me, but for things like StarCraft, you and Patrick say you like that, right? Like actions per second, right? Other things like I'm assuming there are tons of simple metrics that you want to look at to be a good StarCraft player that any strategy guide you look at immediately says Here's what you need to do to win. Here's how you maximize that. Basketball is fascinating in that the rules are written down, right? To win, you need to outscore your opponent. But we're still getting into weird subjective arguments about, like, is a pretty shot valuable? Is a player that can make clutch shots more helpful to a team, instead of just saying, here's how I can maximize the points I make? And the reason I bring that up is, like, it's so tempting to get into, you need to do this to win an NBA title. The reason that's flawed reasoning is there have only been, since the modern NBA, I consider 1980 on the modern NBA. So that's post-ABA merger, introduction of the three-point line, and basically the introduction of the modern stars of the NBA, which was Larry Bird and Magic Johnson.
And keeping track of turnovers and blocks and all that.
Well, the turnovers and blocks and all that were added. So the complete box score without attribution to players was completed in 1974. The complete box score with attributions to players was added in 1978. That's turnovers and blocks. The three-point line was entered in 1980, and then Magic Johnson and Larry Bird entered the league then. So, like, basically it's like 1978 is the official, like, new era if you consider modern box score and merger with ABA. But I'm saying, like, 1980, the reason I really like that is that's the introduction of the three-point line, and that's so much of what we talk about on the show is the importance of the three-point. The three-point line changes so many narratives, and that's the problem is so many of the narratives are basically pre-1980. So many of the narratives are you need someone to space the floor. Pre-three-point line, that's pretty much true, right? And in fact, pre-three-point line, the mid-range jumper made a lot of sense because it was probably, you could probably look at some curve where it's like, I need to get my guy away from the basket to space the floor for some guy to get into the basket. What's the furthest away I can get that spaces it while also being as close as possible where I can make a reasonable shot? That's the logic behind floor spacing before the three-point line. And I actually say if there wasn't the three-point line, that is a very fascinating discussion and one that we actually have the data to look at. The introduction of the three-point line completely nuked that argument, and it has taken 40 years for a team. I say one. I'm really excited to see the future of the NBA because I think you're looking at miscellaneous stats on the bottom. The Houston Rockets are shooting above 50% of their shots from the three-point line. They're like the only team to do it. And if you look at this too, they're not shooting mid-range shots at all. I think they're shooting below 10% from 3 to 10 feet and below 5% from 10 to 16 feet. That is remarkable, or some combination.
Yeah, and here's why I'm bringing that up, Dre. And I might have said this on a previous show, but so let's look at the Rockets versus the Warriors right now, right? The number 1 and 2 teams, the Rockets have pulled ahead, but these two teams have basically been in a dead heat statistically and record-wise all season, right? So let's go to that. Effective field goal percentage, that's just how good your team is at shooting, when the clock is running. We're going to throw away free throws for now because we're talking about style here. Golden State is massively ahead of the Rockets. A full, 57.9 versus 55.5. That's a huge lead in effective field goal percent. Yet, if we go over to O rating, how many points they're actually scoring per possession, the Rockets are ahead. So they're a significantly worse shooting team than the Warriors, but their shot selection is so good that they're a better offense. So there you go.
Their true shooting, and which I will factor in, because then that can do things too, right? Where you get fouled, that is worse. It's fascinating that actually I would still call, the Rockets have a worse O rating than the Warriors. Not by much, right? It's neck and neck.
Now they don't. The Rockets are now 15.7 and the Warriors are 15.2. So the Rockets are ahead now.
It was D rating. That should show you right there. That's how used to the Warriors being amazing at offense. That is remarkable. So yeah, that's what's incredible though. The Rockets, right, are one of the first teams to actually use the offense like I would expect it to be used.
And by the way, shout out to Nylon Calculus. We were bashing them earlier. Krishna Narsu has one of our favorite articles of the year about what if every team had the Houston Rockets shot selection. That's a great article. That's where a lot of this came from.
I guess it is also worth making that point because I've said I've had a chip on the shoulder. What I will say is you do have to be careful about lumping everybody in a group together, and I did make that mistake. I'll put it this way. So let me walk back my statements immediately. There are very vocal and influential people in those communities that over the years have been negative towards the wages of wins produced Boxscore Geeks group. And I still bear a little bit of resentment for that, and that does include Seth Partnow. So that's where this comes from, and that's why this article was interesting to read because I was basically going, the Bucks have an analytics department, but we have not been impressed with them. And even if someone says, well, after they fired Jason Kidd, things are looking great. I'm like, well, that's just strength of schedule. They're not playing anybody.
Yeah, the only real team they really faced during that stretch was Minnesota, who they actually lost to.
Yeah. The Bucks, I mean, are 18th in the league in strength of schedule adjusted wins per strength of schedule adjusted wins. And according to this is actually kind of sad for some of these teams. One of the teams it's sad for is the Spurs, because the Spurs do look in trouble. The Spurs need some help.
They need Kawhi Leonard.
The Bucks have had the sixth easiest schedule in the NBA, and currently are the 18th, according to SRS, best team in the NBA. I expect them to get smoked in the playoffs by whoever they face in the first round. But it's what it is, and that's part of it. It's kind of like we love Giannis and we love analytics, and so it's so tempting. So many people might look at the Bucks and go, well, they look good. And you're like, it's one player, and this is what they could be. That's always been our annoying. That's why we're the annoying people, Brian, because we're that copy editor. We're that friend that's like, this is good, but here's what you could do to be great. And that person is like you're never a fan of that person, because that person's always the person that makes you stay late, right? I've had plenty of people that have good suggestions for the Boxscore Geeks site, and I'm not saying they're wrong, but I'm saying anytime someone comes to me with a good suggestion for the Boxscore Geeks site, in my head I actually curse, because I'm like, you know what? If I'm gonna do that, it's more work. So
the one thing I will say for the Bucks in the playoffs, though, is that the factor of the shortening bench. So with them playing less bench players in the playoffs, that kind of strengthens Giannis because he plays more minutes, right, and helps the Bucks overall. So if Giannis goes crazy in some series, they could threaten someone. But your overall point is right. Like, they are not in the same class, obviously, as Toronto or Boston and potentially Cleveland.
So just I'll throw the 3 points in this article that made me laugh. I mentioned he talks about offensive rating, and I was looking at that, and they talk about Dean Oliver's 4 factors. I had a friend who was getting livid. He's like, the 4 factors are so outdated. I don't necessarily agree with that, but the point being, if you're going to put that offensive rating in perspective, they're 12th in the NBA right now. Like I said, 15 teams make the playoffs. If you're 12th, yes, even if you're a top 10 NBA team, you can still be top 10 and be the bottom third of the teams that are going to go off onto the playoffs, which means you're a first round exit. They talk a bunch about defense, which is fascinating, because we talked a bunch last week about how the Bucks are really struggling on D, and they might have been running the wrong schemes. One of the obvious things they seem to be missing is like play a good center. Like Thon Maker does not count. Thon Maker is a horrible center, and he doesn't even play full minutes. So and they're in the same boat as the Rockets, the Warriors, Brian. It breaks my heart that the Warriors have Nick Young. Had they found a way to spend that $5 million on a legitimate center, maybe tried to pry Robin Lopez off of the.
This is a huge can of worms. I could talk about the Warriors center situation for a long time. The long and the short of it is they have plenty of good centers on their roster right now. They just refuse to give them any minutes. JaVale
McGee and Zaza are both pretty old and beat up.
And David West has been their best big man overall, one of the best big men per minute in the whole league this year.
David West, fountain of youth, but same thing. Like there are players on that team that they might play great in 15 to 20 minutes a game, and I'm like, I don't know if I want you to give them even 2 more minutes a game, because I don't know what that's going to do to their health. But so the same point to the Bucks, right? If we look at the Bucks the last couple of years, their defense hasn't been great. It's possible they're running the wrong schemes. They're not playing traditional, like with a big that they need. And so we're kind of going, what are you doing? And then at the end of the article, they quote Jason Kidd, and that's kind of rough, right? Because they quote Kidd and Partnow a lot in this article. And obviously Kidd's not around. And so he's talking about 3-point shooting. The Bucks aren't a good 3-point shooting team and haven't really ramped up on 3-point shooters for the team. So like I said, I did want to comment on it just because, I did see it come across the wire and figured I would. And it's just, I will say it is very indicative of the classic team bragging about analytics. And I would even call this, I feel odd saying this, because Daryl Morey has done very well in the last year. Like 2 years ago when he picked up Eric Gordon and Ryan Anderson, I was ready to call the end of Daryl Morey. And then, of course, he gets Chris Paul. He gets Lou Williams first. That Lou Williams trade was brilliant. Then he flips Lou Williams into Chris Paul. So I was like, okay, fine. I'm sorry to have doubted you, Daryl Morey. It's the same as the Giants, right? Odd years they win the title, even years, whatever.
They won in 2010, 2012, and 2014 are the 3
so
years
it's
they
even
won.
years, so whatever. Something like that. And
2018, Dre, could be their year, although.
But I'm saying 28. So you're right. Same with Daryl Morey, right? Daryl Morey makes good decisions on even years. But to the point, we've noted that like Sloan was a good way for people to say I'm analytics savvy, and all you have to do is say I have an analytics department. That doesn't mean you follow it. And I'm not saying it's also entirely possible that Seth Partnow is giving lots of good data to the Bucks and they're just ignoring him. But it's just one of those where I'm like, I don't want to concede that the Bucks are a good analytics squad because none of it even lines up with the story that's being told in this article. Get off my lawn. I'll try and make that the last. I'll try and make that the last chip motivated, salt motivated, without like a major incident happening. So hopefully nothing happens and it doesn't.
I'll wait for the incident then, so we can have more salty talk. I have one thing that I'll defend Seth Partnow a little bit here by saying I don't really know what went into having this article written, right? So it was written by, like you said, a local paper of yours, the Journal Sentinel. The writer was Lori Nickel. I have no idea who that is or what her background is in analytics, but my experience is local paper writers in general don't care about analytics too much. So the Partnow quotes in this article were a little disjointed, and yeah, maybe that's because, the Bucks analytics squad isn't doing that great, or maybe this reporter just kind of picked weird quotes out of, what she had on her recorder. So it's really tough to tell by the article. And like you said, he's probably gonna hold stuff back from reporters too. So
yeah, I was gonna say there's no incentive to share things for real. Yeah. I'm gonna skip the next topic because it's similar to the Warriors. It's a huge can of worms. I'm just gonna say I have a plan for an article in the future. It's Donovan Mitchell is not Rookie of the Year. He's not. He just takes a lot of shots. We looked this up in terms of rookies that take the most shots in the NBA that have taken. There have only been like 57 rookies that have taken over 16 shots a game as a rookie. Donovan Mitchell is 10th on that list in terms of shooting efficiency, but most players, Donovan Mitchell included, were poor efficiency shooters as a rookie. So basically, Donovan Mitchell is not a good NBA player, is not a good scorer, should not be taking 16 shots a game as a rookie, and is not the reason the what's it called? The Utah Jazz are winning. So I just want to throw those things out there. Donovan Mitchell, the other night when they beat the San Antonio Spurs, he went 25 for 28 shooting. He missed a clutch free throw. You can look at like Derek Favors, a player we've loved forever. There are lots of good players on the Jazz. Donovan Mitchell is just proving that the old era of thinking, the yay points era, is not dead, because he's proving I can get. He's not even scoring 20 points a game. He's getting 19.5 points a game for the season on 16.6 shots a game, and people are calling him great for that. He's just shooting a lot. That's all that's happening. And I guess I will say more of the things. And I mean, the biggest problem with that is NBA players know that points get them paid. And that is not always what wins games. You have to score efficiently, right? You have to have points without missed shots, and Donovan Mitchell can't do that. But it's hard to convince players not to take shots, even if they're bad shooters. I was talking with a friend about the usage curve this week, and I think that's a fundamental problem. So that the idea behind the skill curve in basketball on paper, the usage curve as they're called, is as you shoot more, your efficiency should drop. The fundamental assumption behind that curve, which I don't believe holds at all, is that implies you are taking an optimized variant or an optimized set of shots, meaning the shots you are taking are the best shots you could. Ergo, you hit a tipping point where, right, each shot has diminishing returns. That's very classic economics, right? Any economics textbooks has this basic principle, right? Like every dollar I invest in my company, I hit a point where each additional dollar is worth less and less and less. And there's eventually
the tipping point. That sounds like a good name for a book.
Yeah, someone should use that. But what I was going to say is, in the NBA, players know inefficient shots can get them paid. And so players are not taking are not taking the best set of shots they could. There are many times, like one of my favorites was Kobe Bryant with the Lakers a few years ago when they weren't making the playoffs. Like just took a half court shot with like 16 seconds left on the shot clock. Players don't take optimal shots because they know if I just take shots, it gets me paid. And so the skill curve is so far divorced from reality for that reason. And so that's what I was saying. Donovan Mitchell probably knows if I average 20 points a game as a rookie, I might win Rookie of the Year. I might get a big contract. It's worth it to me. And we're actually just saying from a what wins game perspective, that is the wrong strategy both for Donovan Mitchell to be taking the win games, that it's not his fault. It's the wrong strategy for the Utah Jazz to be employing. You shouldn't have a rookie taking 16 shots a game if you want to be winning basketball games.
Yeah, and going back to the Rockets and the Warriors for a second, I was just saying how much better, the Rockets' shot selection is than the Warriors. And the Warriors actually isn't that bad, all things considered. But anyway, this is just too funny. I can't say it. Keep going, Dre. Keep going.
What's going on?
No, it's okay. Keep going.
Brian's going to have to tell me this off air because Brian started going. What's up?
No, there's nothing. No, we gotta keep the show going.
All right. Well, I'm going to skip the college corruption. We'll come back to that. I want to get into King of Kong. We talked a little bit about this last week. The rabbit hole went too deep, Brian. I fell into started looking up a subject on the internet, and then 2 hours had passed, and I had watched 5 YouTube videos and read multiple articles. The key point is Twin Galaxies, which used to be the repository for high scores from the golden era of video games, the arcade era. There was a major scandal that came about this last year. It's actually been brewing for a while, which is to say Billy Mitchell, who used to be the high scorer in Pac-Man and Donkey Kong, may have fabricated videos that he used to get his first million-point Donkey Kong victories. And so going over this, looking into it, it gets really fascinating because there's a guy, I believe it's Todd Rogers.
Oh, that was the guy who was the judge in the Billy Mitchell case, and then he also had one of his own scores for a different game fell under this controversy.
So first off, the King of Kong documentary, which is actually a documentary I don't actually like that much, even though it's usually listed as a very popular one. It hits me on so many levels that have to do with basketball statistics, as weird as that sounds. So as I mentioned, in that movie, what comes across is the Twin Galaxies group is a very niche-ish, cliquish set of people that are very protective about video game records. And as mentioned, that reminded me a lot of the basketball community, because when I first started blogging for Dave, I found Dave through Malcolm Gladwell's book Blink. I looked at it explained it, right? Because he bashed Allen Iverson in that book. And the Nuggets had acquired Allen Iverson. And I thought Nuggets are a 48-win team without Allen Iverson, or 44, something like that, mid-40s. Nuggets are a mid-40s win team. They just got an MVP caliber player. The rare thing about the Allen Iverson trade that I really loved, this does not happen enough in the NBA, is it was a direct swap. We turned Andre Miller, what I at the time knew as a good role player, who would in my mind be a first ballot Hall of Famer if I had my druthers. Well, we took a role player point guard, turned them into an MVP, and we took a mid-40s win team and turned them into a mid-40s win team. And it was something didn't click, right? But then Blink, Malcolm Gladwell, and then Wages of Wins explained what was going on. And Allen Iverson isn't an MVP. Allen Iverson just is a Donovan Mitchell. He just takes lots of shots. And so that clicked, and I think that was important. But then, I entered the basketball analytics scene and then found basically the same kind of thing that happened with King of Kong and Twin Galaxies, this very cliquish set of people that were defensive in some cases and basically discovered, and I don't want to come off too naive. I'm an adult. I know how the world works in many cases. You study politics, Brian. So the same thing where it's you discover, the advanced basketball stats community, it's not about the best ideas or the best science or the best math. It's about who you know and who's in control. And there are various gatekeepers already at the time I had entered, and it's gotten worse since. That was the entire Seth Partnow segment. If for those of you just tuning in that didn't listen to the last 30 minutes or whatever, discovering that and going, and that was very much King of Kong, because the full King of Kong story is Steve Weeby's this guy that kind of figures out, hey, I can beat the world record at Donkey Kong. He gets a Donkey Kong Jr. cabinet and retrofits it so it can play both Donkey Kong Jr. and Donkey Kong, and thinks at the time that that's acceptable, that basically there is not a difference, because the way it works is basically the Donkey Kong Jr. board plays the Donkey Kong code, and the only difference is some of the sounds are going to be different because of what's on the hardware. He gets the Donkey Kong world record, and finds this group that makes them jump like what I was just saying, like when's produced, makes them jump through all these hoops, is like your record's invalid, your record's invalid, your record's invalid. Finally, he actually gets the score live. And then Billy Mitchell comes along and submits a videotape for over $1 million to take the record away, although he does come back and win it back via video. But this entire thing fell apart, and you found a great article that said, like, our video game record's broken. So like I said, the first reason this documentary kind of spoke to me was what I just said, this very weird understanding the niche group having to jump through hoops and the weirdness of that. And then also another aspect of it that's actually kind of funny is I don't like the King of Kong documentary because if you listen to anybody who kind of is in the know talk about it, it really isn't the correct story. If you look at the real story behind the Donkey Kong world record, it really was like Billy Mitchell wasn't trying to beat, or Steve Wiebe wasn't trying to beat Billy Mitchell's record. He was trying to beat someone else's record. This other person, Todd, I feel really bad I'm forgetting their last name, but Todd something, you can find it on the Donkey Kong forums, had already taken the record, but he's basically admitted for the story because it made a much better story to tell it as Billy Mitchell versus Steve Wiebe. And it made a lot of sense to just gloss over a lot of things and splice up the timeline. And we discover this happens a lot in sports, right? The true story behind the Golden State Warriors that, won 73 games, the true story behind the 72 win Bulls, the Michael Jordan era Bulls, is fascinating. It's all of these good players, all of these great players, the Andre Iguodala's, the Steve Kerrs, these underrated players, the Cedric Onions.
Cedric Sabalas. Yeah, not quite Ceballos. Sabalas.
Yeah. The Cedric Onions. That's an awesome nickname, man. I'm jealous. All of these nuance, but what you find is people basically.
I don't know if that's one of his real nicknames, by the way. That's just what my friends and I called him in the 90s. So
if I ever meet him in person, I'll ask if that's acceptable. Oftentimes in analytics, the real story is messy. The real story isn't very clear cut. But in the sports world, it is very common to want to give a narrative. And so that's why Donkey Kong, King of Quarters, the documentary, and then all of this stuff really
Fistful of Quarters.
Fistful of Quarters. Yeah. Really speaks to me because I'm like, it's the King of Kong is the documentary. It's about the Donkey Kong world record. Fistful of Quarters is the subtitle. It's because I'm like, this story that is being told isn't real because it's leaving out the messy, gooey underside. And that is much more fascinating. Like I said, I started digging into it and I was like, holy cow. And I will say, Billy Mitchell, it's remarkable how petty he is just looking at this, where it became very, very clear looking through all this that he just couldn't let someone else have his moment. He had to be the first to do some things. And we were defending him a little last week, and it is true, but it looks like in many cases, and this is the last, I'll put the capper on it, say, looking over a lot of things, you had an article up that said, like, our video game record's broken. Todd Rogers is this guy that back in the day for Twin Galaxies was a referee, but referees could be players. And this is a guy that had direct access to the database and entered tons of world records for himself. I forget who, I feel bad. I'm not going to include it in the show notes because I may not even put the show notes together. This one guy went through a bunch of just like arbitrarily started picking out Todd Rogers records because he has like 17,000 or 1,700, one of the two, in the Twin Galaxies database, and was like, tried to start determining how many of these weren't real, weren't legit. And like many of them, you don't even need to play the game to find out. So for instance, there are some Atari games that score on increments of 50, and he'll have a score of like 1,028,028. And many of these scores, Todd Rogers will vastly blow away second place. And a lot of these scores, a lot of the way these scoring systems work for Twin Galaxies is the buddy system. You'd basically have someone verify your score. And I forget the guy's name. Again, there are too many. It's like Game of Thrones at this point with how many names I have to try and keep track of. One of the people that verified a lot of Todd Rogers' score is actually in prison and just verified a lot of his scores. Then, of course, Todd Rogers is a person that's verified a lot of Billy Mitchell stuff. So essentially, video game records, like this is what was fascinating to us from like the basketball stats community perspective is the history of video game records is essentially broken, right? You cannot trust the source of all of these numbers, of all of these records.
Well, the one thing I'll say is that Twin Galaxies is like classic gaming, or it's like its own category. So that's just kind of one subsection that, nowadays it's all done live and, or streamed. Okay. But you're right. Your overall point is right.
The history, I mean, it'd be like, let's say tomorrow, And there might be some of this. This would be fascinating because we do have scorekeepers, so there is subjectivity. Imagine tomorrow someone came out and said to you, guess what? All of the box scores at Basketball Reference, all of them, right? 90% of them are wrong. Turns out the data system entry that did it added random noise for 3 players, right? Like if they told you, let's say 3 players in every single game in the history of the NBA database that's at Basketball Reference, 3 players in every game are just random noise. And they're not real. That number's real. Imagine what that would do. And that's essentially the state that historical video game records are in. But then where it comes back, where I'm fascinated about the future of both sports and video games is, when I looked into all of this, the number of ways you can cheat in video game records is huge. The basic point I would give you is you can't even trust a video. One person, so streaming has gotten really popular. There's a streaming gamer that would basically throw up there called MAMES. I already forgot what that stands for. It's like machine adjusted something emulation. But basically you can play an emulator on your computer.
MAME is just the name of the emulator. That's just the name the developer gave it.
It stands for something, I assure you.
Yeah.
Basically, people would basically be playing a replay of a MAME while they were playing live on Twitch. And they'd be recording their hands, and then all you'd have to do is you would look at the screen, you look at their hands, and you just wait, and you're like, oh, their hand was off by a little bit. So they were pretending to play live, but they weren't.
If you want the acronym, it's Multiple Arcade Machine Emulator.
Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah.
And so, but the point being, videotapes are like impossible for video game records. A lot of these things are easy to trick. The reason Steve Wiebe, I can even understand the incredulity, because one of the things that happened, again, another Game of Thrones person name I don't remember, there was a rival of Billy Mitchell's that had a world record in, what's that game, the nuclear war one where you're Missile Command.
Missile Command, yeah.
I forget the guy's name. If you look up like Missile Command world record, you find the guy. So this guy had beef with Twin Galaxies. I'm laughing a little bit about that because I mentioned like every show I play Pokemon Go, and there's like random little infeuds between some of the people that play Pokemon Go about like who's cheating and who's not, and it's hilarious reading about like arcade game records and pettiness there. It's like, oh, it's always around. But anyway, he helped Steve Wiebe out by setting up his Donkey Kong machine. And then the complaint people had is, oh, this guy doesn't like us. He supplied the hardware. We don't know he didn't provide a fake board to Steve Wiebe. And in fact, one of the damning points against Billy Mitchell in regards to his high score is, if you statistically analyze the frequency of like triple barrels he gets on these frames, it's like a 99.9%. There's a random number generator. That means it's possible he got that outcome. But essentially to get the high score in these games, it's interesting because there's a random number generator. There's like an element of skill and an element of chance, meaning you have to get a good run to get the high score as well as play really well. So anyway, they're basically saying, oh, Billy Mitchell just got these high scores. It seems impossible, right? To do this, what they're estimating he did is he used a MAME and just kept, he'd save and then reset until he got a good screen and play on and keep doing it. That's what a lot of people that cheat in the speed running high scores thing do. They use a MAME, they use an emulator, they reset the game and splice together a perfect run. So they do.
Yeah, the better way to say it is MAME has the ability to do save states, and like you said, you can do it down to the machine level. So it's manipulating save states within the program MAME.
And I mean, for instance, one of the things, this is something you do. Final Fantasy VII. There are some great videos on YouTube about like how to game Final Fantasy VII, but there's a side quest in Final Fantasy VII to breed chocobos. And one of the annoying things about this is that there's a random number generator. So one of the things you're supposed to do if you don't want to have to like wait forever is you breed chocobos, you hatch a new chocobo. If you don't get what you want, you reset the game, you restart the game, and then you do an action. And if you do an action, you reset the random number generator and you try again. And you can keep doing that over and over again. So basically, people are able to do this emulators. So they submit a videotape that looks like it's live, but it's really a lot of save points with them messing with the random number generator to get the optimal outcome. So there's that. People were suspicious Steve Wiebe had altered hardware, meaning someone provided him with a board, but maybe that board cheated. There is a Donkey Kong 3 record where they even admit, like the guy, he's not like hiding it, but he gets like 9 million points, and he basically says, well, the settings on the board were different, right? Because there are certain arcade games where you can open them up and change the settings to be harder or easier. So obviously that matters too.
And if you've never been into an arcade, you could what you can tell when that happens, like they would put special markings on the machines, like this is Hyper Donkey Kong or something, or like Street Fighter was a big example of that, right? So like modding arcade machines was a known thing that happened a lot back in the day.
Yeah, and so that's the problem is when you get a videotape from somebody and they go, I did this, and you go, we can't guarantee, like Steve Wiebe, it makes sense where all the feels in the world for the hate, but you can also say you're using a modded Donkey Kong machine. He's in the Guinness Book of World Records for that, actually. They actually have him as a modded machine for the world record, and he's the only one. It's a closed category, and he's the only one in it, but he has the world record, is what it is. But that's where esports in the future of gaming becomes fascinating, because that is where you might start wondering with esports, well, is it all just going to go to the cloud? Is everybody just always going to, just be twitching and doing live streams? And you go, no, because it's so easy to cheat, right? That's been a thing in online games for years, right? If you had software running that lets you aim better, right? That's been a classic thing, like in Counter-Strike, or if you're messing with the latency, right? If you have better latency, so that actually makes the idea of like arenas where you can have official hardware with official judges. So I was very excited. That was what was funny. It was like I watched all this stuff and was like, holy cow, the world of cheating, the steroid scandal, so to speak. Like, it is worth noting, right? At the end of the steroid scandal, they didn't. The end result I didn't take away from reading about, Barry Bonds and Sammy Sosa and
Mark McGuire were the big three.
Right.
Roger Clemens as well. Sorry, Roger Clemens also.
I almost threw out Larry Walker. Larry Walker says Coors screwed him over from like his Hall of Fame chances. And Larry Walker belongs in the Hall of Fame. Get it done.
Larry Walker, just looking at him, didn't look like a writer, but who knows?
I'm not saying he's saying it's because he played at Coors, and he's not wrong. Before the pre-Humidor Coors was much different in terms of home run, and even post-Humidor Coors, it's much.
He's a great player on the Expos as well, Jay.
He's an amazing player, though. Yeah, Larry Walker, Hall of Fame. Give me a break. Either you accept that Coors is part of baseball, or you don't. Regardless, Larry Walker belongs to the Hall of Fame. I don't know who we're arguing with. It's kind of funny. Just like in the middle of a video game thing, I'm like, let's talk to the people clearly listening that have votes to the Hall of Fame for baseball.
Yep.
But like I said, at the end of the steroid scandal, at the end of the Tim Donaghy basketball scandal, at the end of all of these scandals in sports, I haven't been like, you kind of just need to rip up the record book. The record book doesn't mean anything. But after reading through all this video game stuff, Twin Galaxies is nothing. I'm sorry. Like, the history of Twin Galaxies, you just can't trust it, which is rough. But like I said, then the exciting thing to me, knowing that esports is becoming a bigger thing, is going, that's exciting for the future of both sports and video games, because it's going, there is a very real need for live sports in arena areas where the competitors are next to each other, which is already a thing, right? To guarantee that this kind of, these kind of shenanigans don't happen, which is kind of cool. That's my big tie-in. Sorry, that long walk just for that. So basically, Larry Walker belongs in the Hall of Fame, and esports are the future, Brian. That's my takeaway from that segment.
No, I agree with most of what you said. I'm always a little suspicious of esports, just because there's always been times when it's built up before and then come crashing back down. So I guess I see all this money coming, all this sponsorship money coming to esports right now. I'm suspicious if they're getting the return. Getting a million viewers, it was great for the Dota Boston Major. I mentioned that on a recent show. But, I mean, there's so much money going into Dota. Like, is that worth it when a pro sport gets more than 1 million viewers for every game, So
I'll give you a few comparisons.
They're getting there.
So the first I'll give you is like tablet PCs. Think of how many times those failed before they succeeded. I'm not even saying the current iteration of esports is going to succeed. I'm just saying I see it. And a lot of things that do succeed, like tablets as an example, sometimes you need to wait until the technology catches up. So like the tablet computer really, really needed, I would say, a combination of three things. Gorilla Glass, that's the really nice glass that you could use on the back of your phone to swipe and all that. Better batteries, which we still need better batteries, right? Like I would say we barely crossed the tipping point threshold for acceptable batteries for mobile devices, but better batteries, and then Wi-Fi. That was a very big thing, right? Because before Wi-Fi, you could have a tablet computer, and basically you would eventually be constrained that you would have to sit down and plug it in for it to be useful.
And so the CPUs weren't powerful enough until the mid-2000s really either.
Yeah. So I'm saying, like, esports, I might be wrong because it's hard. I spent the entire first part of the show talking about how hard it is to predict a deterministic game with set players that we argue are among the most consistent year to year. So God knows what the future of competitive anything is going to look like in the future. But it just seems to me that there's a very real need for live if you're going to do video games, because it's so easy to cheat. That's what was fascinating too, is I'm looking up 1980s cheaters, and then the next thing, YouTube's algorithm is like, do you want to hear about all these Twitch streamers that cheated? And I'm like, do I? And so, 2 hours later, I'm like, I need to get back to work. But that's just the point, right? Is that it's too easy to cheat at video games, meaning there's a very real need for live. It's much easier to stomach the ethical ramifications of people playing video games. Yeah, they might have to retire by 30 because of carpal tunnel, but that's way different than having to retire by 40 and not having a brain by the time you're 50. It's much more affordable than a lot. You don't need an ice rink. You don't need these big fancy stadiums. You can do it in a lot of halls that already exist. So I think there's a future, Brian. And I know, as you're pointing out, you're being the smart one going, you're not the first person that said this, and this has been said many, many times in the past, and it still doesn't have success. But after watching a few YouTube documentaries based on arcade games, I think I'm in a good state to say that, Brian.
Well, yeah. So I guess, again, to go my history real fast, I used to play competitive card games back in the 90s and early 2000s, and now I'm just kind of playing card games on the internet. And if you look at the Twin Galaxies situation, like what was the final evidence that has kind of opened up this controversy? Well, it's someone looking through the code, line by line of these, replays, right? Or the code of the main program, right? So that's kind of where it's gone with competitive card games too. Back when I had to play, we were constantly worried about people cheating, just like drawing extra cards, stacking their deck. Just because if you think about like a magician, doing magic tricks with cards, like competitive players would palm cards, hide cards. There's very famous examples of that in Magic the Gathering. Jeez. Famous pro players getting banned, right? But then as you move to a digital card game, the code of the game is known by the company. So maybe there's a problem with that. Maybe the company's not, up and up. But generally, we're all working under the same rule set with a computer instead of, people playing cards. So I think that's a big advantage in terms of worrying about cheating anyway. And, and a big thing in the last 10 years or so, which has been this most recent rise of esports, which has coincided basically with the rise of streaming, right?
Yes.
Twitch came along in 2010 or whatever, but streaming was starting to happen before then. And that's when, it really rose up, right? So this most recent era of streaming has, brought about games that are actually designed for competitive play. So they will build code into the game so that the competitive players, it'll cater them so you can't cheat, and will do the matchmaking and all that. So, we're on the way there, I guess is what I would say, but I'm still skeptical.
And I will, it's interesting. I will just say, a lot has changed too, where streaming has helped a lot tremendously too, where I know that was a complaint about a lot of old games. I would even agree, like StarCraft or whatever, right? Even a good announcer, you watch a game of StarCraft, it's not intuitively obvious who's winning and why.
Yep.
And it might be obvious once they've won, but they're like, oh my God, I was watching a Warcraft 3, and the Warcraft 3 meta game, if I recall, is you have heroes and you have armies. So you want to build up a big army to win. That's very classic 2D games. And then you also have heroes that you want to go around and level up because heroes help you out. And so it's like, you're like, oh my God, he missed that. He missed aggroing that group with his heroes. So his hero's only level 2. So he's behind the other guy. And you're like, I don't know what's going on. That's a lot going on. Whereas, a lot of the newer games, it's easier with Twitch and stuff. And then, like you're pointing out, games specifically being built to be monitored and watched. It's fascinating. So
also for the monetary ecosystem. So you can games are being designed now such that a competitive team could show their sponsor, their out-of-game sponsor, in the game, and that makes everyone happy, right? So that's kind of where it's going.
So I'm loving this. We got to end because we've been going for over an hour and a half, Brian, which is it's my fault. But I had so much more to talk about King of Kong after last week. But all I was going to say is what's fascinating is I'm very optimistic about this. Like I'm not, and you keep saying things that make me even more optimistic. So we'll see. 10 years from now, people that still know us come back and tell us if we are right or wrong about esports.
Still a lot of Billy Mitchells in esports, Dre. That's all there is to it.
I will be attending Sloan next week. So that is the 23rd through the 25th, I believe. I will be in Boston. So if you'll be attending Sloan, let me know. I have made, back when we used to do it regularly, when Arturo and I went like 3 years in a row, I had Boxscore Geek shirts. Say Nerd Numbers on the back now, but yes, I've made some shirts. I'm very excited about them. So look for me at Sloan. Look for the shirts I'll be wearing. If you have any questions for me that you want me to ask at Sloan or whatever, feel free to put them somewhere. Comment sections of YouTube, Twitter for me, because I have been posting at nerdnumbers.com basically, and I don't have comments at nerdnumbers.com. So yeah, we'll figure something out. And as I mentioned, I did post about this, but basically it is WordPress is a blogging platform. It's just so much better for things like being able to insert photos, to be able to schedule it, to be able to save, multi-edit. Just so much better than what we have. And as should be blatantly apparent to everybody, because we talk about features and stuff we want to add to Boxscore Geeks, our time is limited. I don't really have the time, and not only do I not have the time, I don't really have the interest in improving the blogging software of the Boxscore Geeks. So this is the current temporary thing. And yeah, you should check it out. I've written a couple articles. Monday through Thursday probably is not going to happen. That was my ambitious goal for week one. And I take care of my kid during the day, and it became very apparent. But I did write 2 articles this week. And one of them is about the 2002-2003 Dallas Mavericks, who I think should have won a title. I think with just having Mike D'Antoni as their coach, even in 2003, I think that team could have won a title. So yeah, that's all I got. I don't really have any shout outs. I'll just say that's been our show over an hour and a half. I'll let Brian, if you have any shout outs, say them, and then I'll lead us out.
No, we already talked about my shout out, which was just Patrick did update his portfolio piece on the Boxscore Geeks.
All right, perfect. Anyway, this has been the Boxscore Geek Show. If you found us not through the website, you can find the tools and analysis at boxscoregeeks.com, the blog posts at nerdnumbers.com. We go live every week, twitch.tv/nerdnumbers, usually 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time Wednesday. I was so confident to say that last week, and then Valentine's Day was this week. So that's why we went on Thursday this week, because, it's date night on Valentine's Day. You can find our show, iTunes and Stitcher, the Boxscore Geek Show. Subscribe, upvote if you haven't, and you can find recaps on channel Nerd Numbers on YouTube. I've been your host, Ray Alvarez. You can find me on Twitter as Nerd Numbers if you haven't heard Nerd Numbers enough. And as mentioned, producer, co-host, voice of God, Boxscore Brian, who is Brian Foster in real life. Got that confused. That's been our show, and we'll talk to you next time.